Hi everybody, welcome to this devlog. I've created the game for a game jam on itch.io. Let's see how that went. My vacation was coming up and I was looking to do a game jam. The Goedware Game Jam fitted perfectly in my vacation. It was 10 days, so I had plenty of time. I wouldn't spend the whole day on coding, just a couple of hours each day. The rest of the day would be family time. Of course, I was looking forward to the theme review. When it was announced, Ecosystem, I immediately liked it. The workings of ecosystems are interesting, at least to me, and it would be nice to make something about this theme. The first day I spent on Googling and reading about ecosystems. Most of it I could remember from high school, but since that was a long time ago, I needed to refresh my memory. I decided that my main goal for this jam was to learn some new stuff, to try out some coding, but mainly trying to get an ecosystem simulation going. My focus wouldn't be making a great game, let alone winning the jam, but on the workings of an ecosystem. Learning was also highly encouraged by the Goedware Game Jam. Here's the definition of an ecosystem on Wikipedia. An ecosystem consists of all the organisms and the physical environment with which they interact. These biotic and abiotic components are linked together through nutrient cycles and energy flows. This is what I wanted to simulate, a closed system of plants and animals with a nutrient cycle. I had to choose how I would portray the game. I didn't want to use a top-down perspective. That's what I would use most of the time, and I just wanted to do something different. Also, I knew I had to draw some animals, and the side perspective was much easier for me to draw. The game wasn't going to be a more standard game type, platformer, RPG, puzzle, etc. Instead, I envisioned it more as a simulator. This would be fun to explore both the theory and the mechanics. It would have a drawback though, I couldn't fall back on my experience with more standard games. It would take longer to develop and the outcome would be uncertain. I started with the game environment. Like I said, it had a side view perspective. I wanted it to have some different ground levels just for breaking up the monotony. And I wanted the world to be circular, meaning that when you go long enough in one direction, you will end up at the start. I had never made that before, and I have to say it was a bit of a challenge to get it right. One simple problem, for example, was to get the height levels of the start and end about the same. I didn't want to have an obvious cutoff point. Also, the scrolling wasn't as easy as I was used to. Eventually, I got it the way I wanted it. Then I made the main character, Nymph. I've read a bit on Greek and Roman deities and she would fit as a life and nature goddess. Her objective was to bring life to a barren world and to keep nature balanced. Nutrients flow from her hands to the ground and feed it. She can fly above the surface of the world and you can see the nutrients transforming the lifeless dirt to fertile soil. Later she will be able to place plants and animals. The plants will use the nutrients from the soil to grow. Herbivores eat the plants and carnivores eat the herbivores. All the animals will excrete nutrients as droppings and when they die. That way the nutrients will be in a closed loop. I've created sprites for the plants and animals and placed them onto the map. I was worried that when there would be a large number of animals, the game would slow down because of all the interactions between the animals and the environment. Normally I would have one array for all the objects. Every game tick, about 60 per second, all objects are updated and drawn to the screen. If you have them interact, the number of functions that are executed per tick would increase exponentially. For example, let's say you have 1,000 animals in the game. If they would move randomly, you would have 1,000 updates per tick. But if you want them to interact, you'd have to check every animal against every other animal. Because animal A needs to decide if it wants to eat animal B or mate with it or run away from it. That decision for all animals will take almost 1 million functions per update. That's why I've chosen to store the animals per map tile. Some tiles would not have any animals on top of them, others would have a couple. When you draw the animals, you only have to draw the animals that are in the part of the map that is shown on the screen. And although all animals will be updated every tick, you would only have to look at animals stored in neighboring tiles. An animal can't hunt another animal who happens to be on the other side of the world. Of course, in the end my game never needed such a high number of animals, so I probably didn't need this more complicated approach. Still, it worked really well and I can use this system in the future when needed. At first, the nutrient system was completely closed, meaning that every nutrient would pass through plants and animals and end up in the soil again. There was only one problem. Since the nymph added nutrients constantly to the soil, the amount of nutrients in the world would keep increasing. I didn't want the player to press a button to sprinkle the nutrients because that would be rather annoying. That's why I've decided that a portion of the nutrients leaks away. Actually, that's a better simulation of reality anyway, because sunlight is the main source of energy in the world and most of the energy disappears in the form of heat. I created an interface for the player so that the nymph can add plants and animals. Originally, I had a scrollable inventory with all the plants and animals, but quickly I realized I could never make as many animals as I had planned. Overscoping is always a serious danger in game jams. I decided to focus on the 2 animals that I had and skip the rest. The interface was simplified accordingly. The basics of the game were done. I was about a week into the game jam and I had 3 days left when I came to the conclusion that my game wasn't much fun to play. I had had a lot of fun making it and I had learned a lot. Since this was my main objective, I didn't feel too bad about it. But the game just wasn't much fun. You could place animals and watch them interact, but after placing them you didn't have much to do. And there was no clear objective. You couldn't win and you couldn't lose, meaning basically I didn't have a game. First, I thought of an objective for the game. It was hard to get a lot of foxes. Most of them would die of starvation. I thought that the number of foxes could be a scoring system, but then of course you should have some influence over how successful foxes and mice would be. That's when I thought of the properties interface. I came up with 3 major properties: weight, fertility and speed, that would determine how the animals would behave. Higher scores on these properties would have benefits as well as drawbacks. As a player, you needed to find the most optimal settings for both animals to get as much foxes and mice as possible. Now I had a game. You could place 3 instances of each plant and animal. When the foxes went extinct, the game was over. During the game, you could change the properties of the animals. I added a simple menu and a high score. The music was actually one of the first things I finished. Because I would leave my home during my vacation, I wouldn't have access to my Mac with all the music tools I have on that. That's why I made it in advance. I knew what vibe the game would be, so I was able, I hope, to create relaxing music that fitted the gameplay. It's what you hear under this video. To be honest, I don't think Nymph is a very good game. It is playable, doesn't have many bugs, but it still isn't much fun to play. From the start I knew this was a potential hazard. If you don't focus on gameplay when designing, it will probably not be a good game. On the other hand, I learned a lot during the game jam and had a lot of fun. So that's a success. Something else that could be better: there's a lot going on under the hood. The player won't notice all the details that went into the energy cycle and animal behavior. I could have made a couple of things a lot simpler and it wouldn't matter to the player anyway. But those details were the most interesting part for me as a programmer. Conclusion: if I want to make a great game, I should use a different approach, but for me this was a successful game jam. Thanks Goedware. The next video will be another episode on the adventures of Bob. Hopefully I'll see you there. And let me know in the comments if you liked this content. Bye!